What's going on, Summoners? I'm Kangas, and today we got our high ELO tier list for patch 2.2. Now, you might have already seen our previous tier list video covering play up to Platinum 1, but in this video, the champions and picks mentioned will be Emerald to Challenger. So if you're a beginner player, check out the other one. But before we begin, we got our question of the day. If you could choose one ability from Wild Rift to have in real life, which ability would it be? I think I'd pick TF's ult because I'd never be late for work again. Sorry, Ian. Anyway, let me know yours in the comments down below, and let's get into the video. It was like 5 minutes. There's 5 minutes. To start off the list, let's go into the Baron lane. Camille is the first champion in our S tier for this list. She's pretty difficult to play, but when mastered, she excels at both split pushing and team fighting. Camille also functions perfectly well in the early game, most of her damage coming from her first 3 skills combined with her auto attacks. These allow her to trade in the Baron lane with ease and then also scale into the mid to late game without many worries. And her hookshot utility is unmatched in regards to mobility, since she's able to cross terrain in order to escape or chase enemies. This makes her extremely slippery, capable of adapting to practically every sticky situation in the game. Especially since she has the ability to lock down single target enemy champions, her surprise initiations are very effective. If players know their maximum potential and damage output on this pick, she is extraordinarily powerful. But keep in mind, she is not easy to play, so that's why she's the S tier on the high ELO tier list and only C tier in the low ELO. Make sure you understand her damage, abilities, and also memorize her cooldowns before running her in a ranked game. Next up on our talking points, we have Singed. We put him in the C tier since he's strong, but only in very specific circumstances. When he's allowed to walk around poisoning the enemy, he plays well, dealing fantastic damage. This typically means that his team has many frontliners or the enemy has a lack of crowd control. Either way, they're both very particular situations that he excels in. But if neither of these conditions are met, Singed will have difficulty closing the distance on his enemy, often getting locked down and bursted before he can perform the signature Singed marathon run. There are just better Baron lane champions that perform in less niche situations, and the higher ELO you go, the more players know how to play around Singed. And our next highlighted Baron laner is Yasuo in the C tier. We talk about him a lot, so instead of discussing his playstyle, let's just go over the reason he's functioning poorly in this lane. The base armor and bonus shield reduction on his kit from a couple patches ago made extended trades against other melee champs pretty difficult, as he lacks the base tankiness and sustainability that other Baron laners have. The Yasuo pick relies heavily on having a strong frontline with crowd control, but since Baron laners typically provide that, Yasuo is not the greatest pick to insta-lock in high ELO games. So with our highlighted picks out of the way, here's the full Baron lane tier list. Before we move on, I want to remind everybody to check out our Wild Rift community Discord. You can find a link in the description down below and go make some friends that love Wild Rift just as much as you. Also, we finally got Tia to join, so you can come hang out with some of us hosts as well. Just make sure you join the pro-Kangas cult and not the anti-Kangas cult. Thanks for that one, Nate. Alright, moving on to the jungle, we have the almost broken Dr. Mundo. As suspected in our patch update video, Dr. Mundo's nerfs were preemptive in order to stop him from being completely broken when the new tank items came out. But despite the nerfs, he is still incredibly strong and standing as an S tier jungler. By rushing Sunfire Aegis, the cleaver throwing Madman reaches his power spike really early on. This allows him to deal consistent area of effect DPS by simply standing nearby his enemies. The item also aids in his survivability and jungle clears. Although he doesn't have much crowd control on his kit, Dr. Mundo is a fantastic frontline champion, regenerating health faster than any other champion can in the game. Especially with the Mortar Reminder nerfs, Mundo becomes practically unkillable, especially when he gains a lead. He performs exceptionally well in almost every team composition, as a good frontline is imperative for the success of pretty much every team. But since he does lack crowd control, he works even better when the rest of his team has lockdown abilities. Be sure to try him out, especially if you get autofill jungle. Next up, we have another S tier pick in Vi. She's an easy to play champion with consistent damage and crowd control all built into her kit, making her ganks detrimental to the enemy team. But to make the most of this pick, Vi players need to make sure that they're farming very well. This means that Vi needs to be aware of jungle timers and pathing, while tracking the enemy jungler's movement. Counter jungling while securing vision around the map is key to maximizing the Vi pick as a jungler. Once she saves up enough gold for a Trinity Force, she gains a massive power spike, because the item synergizes perfectly with her kit. When the game rolls into the teamfighting stages, understanding the initial focus of her ultimate, Assault and Battery, distinguishes the great Vi players from the mediocre. This requires Vi players to understand the key threats on the enemy team, while gauging the dangers of engaging that champion. In regards to team compositions, she is a great jungler for almost every scenario, but definitely benefits from an additional frontline engager. And the last highlighted jungler for this tier list is Shyvana, now in the A tier. Before learning her ultimate, the Shapeshifting Dragon is pretty weak, relying on farming to get through the early stages of the game. But once she does get through that stage, Shyvana is an engager, a tank, and a damage carry all built into one. Her DPS on Elemental Drakes is the highest in the game for junglers, while her ultimate provides fantastic engage and crowd control for her team. Her ranged Fireball in Dragon form is a great execution skill, capable of destroying enemies who are attempting to flee. She fits very well into every team composition as she's very versatile. The issue with the pick though, as mentioned before, is her relatively weak early game. When facing off against another skilled jungler, if they pick an earlier focused jungler such as Lee Sin or Jarvan, they can snowball the lanes through ganks before Shyvana becomes relevant. And at that point, no matter how strong she gets, if the lanes are simply lost from the beginning, chances of a comeback become harder. So here's the full jungle tier list. Now moving on to the mid lane, we're highlighting Corki first. He's in the overpowered picks and is honestly just busted right now. The new tier changes allow Sapphire Crystal to charge mana stacks, allowing for it to be the perfect item for Corki to start. The item lets Corki spam abilities in lane from very early on, making him an oppressive lane bully while scaling additional AD on his future core item, Manamune. By rushing Trinity Force soon after, an item that was buffed in patch 2.2, Corki has never felt so good on Wild Rift. He scales very fast into the game while dealing exceptional damage. These two items make him the perfect damage carry since he can hit the enemy backline with his skill shots while chunking down enemy frontliners with his Gatling gun. Corki also has one crowd control skill through the usage of his package, which flings Corki forward a large distance while splitting the enemy team. Of course, he relies heavily on skill shots, requiring a firm understanding and confidence in landing these abilities. His jumps and close range engages can very well be ints if he performs them improperly, and without knowing his full damage potential, Corki may well be useless in the hands of an amateur player. But in a high elo player's hands, this guy is nuts. Next up, we have Ziggs in the S tier for this list. He's great at pushing the lane since all of his abilities provide area of effect damage. In Wild Rift, taking down inhibitor towers is essential since these do not respawn, granting permanent super minions for the rest of the game. Satchel Charge has the ability to execute towers upon getting them to a specific amount of health. This makes him perfect for pushing an advantage while maximizing split push potential. But similar to Corki, he's extremely reliant on mastering the skill shots in his kit. If you can't hit his first ability Bouncing Bomb, he'll definitely lack damage. In addition, Ziggs' ultimate Mega Infernal Bomb is a near global area of effect skill that deals massive damage. This skill can be used to both clear minions while providing aerial support. But to do so, Ziggs needs to actively study the map. Gauging exactly when using his ultimate ability will ensure a fantastic play. And the last pick that we have for mid lane is Akali in the A tier. In the Baron lane, she is fantastic since most champions are melee, allowing her to dash around and poke them effectively. But in the mid lane, most other mages have enough range to kite her down during the laning phase. Without the ability to walk up safely, she cannot push out the wave as fast as she would be able to make essential roams to assassinate key targets. But of course, once the team fights begin in the later stages of the game, she plays phenomenally well, capable of bursting down pretty much anybody. So here's our full mid lane tier list. Now moving on to AD carries, we have Xayah up first. She's in our OP list of champion picks since she has crowd control, splash damage, and safety all built into her kit. But of course, she's not the easiest champion to play with all those feathers to micromanage. Once this mechanic and skill is mastered though, she takes over both the laning phase and team fights, with no real weaknesses to exploit in her play. Xayah synergizes perfectly with tank champions that provide both frontline and crowd control, since her feathers excel at following up on already immobilized targets. Xayah's ultimate flings her up into the air, making her completely invulnerable, avoiding burst damage and engages. This unique advantage pushes her into the overpowered picks since when stacked with Zhonya's enchant, she is incredibly difficult to kill for an AD carry. Now moving down to the S tier, we have Ezreal. Similar to Xayah, he is very safe with his kit. He also benefits greatly from the item changes brought by patch 2.2. Rushing a tier while building the Sheen soon after allows Ezreal to scale really fast into the game, allowing him to spam his skills really early on while enhancing his auto attacks after. Through the utility of his skill shots, Ezreal players can stand way far back and still deal substantial damage, avoiding the threats of the enemy team entirely. He excels in most team compositions thanks to his arcane shift that allows him to avoid almost every skill in the game when utilized properly. And in the hands of a skilled player, he can also use it aggressively to follow up on engages. But if players lack the understanding and skill to hit his main abilities, Ezreal players will find themselves lacking damage. Miss Fortune has unfortunately been dropped to A tier. Her laning phase is still pretty strong since her first skill double up is straight up broken. Targeting a minion to hit a far away enemy champion is still super strong, but with other lane bullies like Xayah making their way onto the Wild Rift, Miss Fortune is finally vulnerable to taking damage in the laning phase as well. And since her base defenses have been weakened, this of itself is enough to bump her down a peg. In addition, Misfortune lacks the safety that other top tier AD carries have, often making her a sitting duck when engaged on during team fights. So here's our full AD carry tier list. Last but definitely not least, we have supports, starting with Braum. He is without a doubt overpowered in patch 2.2. The shield he provides blocks so much of the essential damage necessary for the enemy team to create favorable opportunities, both in teamfights and also in the laning phase. For that laning phase, there are no champions that effectively counter Braum right now. He can block almost all the Enchanter support's ability damage, while his passive allows for his auto attacks to stun in order to help disengage fights initiated by tank supports. Oh, and with the buffs to tank items in general, Braum now scales really well into the game, an issue that kinda plagued him before. I think it's finally time that I actually start playing this guy. And the second pick is Galio, who we've placed into the A tier for supports. This pick functions best in serving as a crowd control machine, engaging on smart plays while rotating the map whenever additional support is necessary elsewhere. By using his ultimate heroic entrance, Galio flies up into the air, dropping on an ally while knocking up those around them. He's only in our high elo tier list for this role, since we believe the Galio support requires a really strong understanding of the champion and map rotations to really maximize him as a support pick, something that most beginner players will lack. But if enemy players know the effective distance of his engages, Galio's crowd control can be easily avoided, making him pretty kiteable. And the final pick for today is Leona at the S tier. Her crowd control is oppressive, making her the perfect counter for all Enchanter supports. If she lands an initial lockdown ability, Leona can easily perform 2 additional lockdowns immediately after. This makes escape impossible when fighting her in the lane phase. Since she can face tank for anyone in the allied team while providing crowd control, Leona's roam potential is absolutely fantastic. She fits exceptionally well in all team compositions, since she's a strong frontline and crowd control tank that is almost always useful. And if you haven't tried her out yet, check out our 1-minute guide on Leona. You'll learn a lot of her tricks. And finally, here is the full support list. And there you have our high elo tier list for patch 2.2. We heard your feedback, so this will be the format for all of our tier lists going forward to help with the accuracy of our champion rankings. Don't forget to answer our question of the day in the comments down below, and for even more Wild Rift content, make sure that you like the video and sub to the channel. That's it for today, so best of luck on the Rift, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time. You think anybody will notice that I'm wearing my workout clothes?
Yeah.
My deadlift clothes?
Probably not.
Probably not.